Hello, this is Roland. Today I want to read something to you from The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. And I'm going to find the beginning of the book, and I want to read something to you, which I've found very interesting. I first heard this on the radio, and the minute I heard it, I was intrigued. This book was written by someone who knew Brother Lawrence. So it's first of all, it's by someone who knew Brother Lawrence and talks about Brother Lawrence. And then at the end of the book, there are some letters from Brother Lawrence to people. But here's the beginning of the book. The first time I saw Brother Lawrence was upon the 3rd of August, 1666. He told me that God had done him a singular favor in his conversion at the age of 18, that in the winter, seeing a tree stripped of its leaves, and considering that within a little time the leaves would be renewed, and after that the flowers and fruit appear, he received a high view of the providence and power of God, which has never since been effaced from his soul. That this view had perfectly set him loose from the world, and kindled in him such a love for God that he could not tell whether it had increased during the more than 40 years he had lived since. This is really interesting. Brother Lawrence looked at a tree in the winter, bare, and when he realized that it wouldn't be long before it would come back to life again, that leaves would come forth, and then flowers, and then fruit. And in that instant, he realized God's providence, God's genius, God's creativity, God's care. All of that, he realized it in an instant, in a lightning flash. And I believe that's true. When you go out in the world and you see things, you see a butterfly or a leaf, light shining upon something, anything, even in science, mathematics, the beauty of it, the genius of it, the perfection of it. When you see that, it reminds you of God. Every time you see it, something like that, you realize just how magnificent. It's like going to a museum and looking at paintings of a great painter. You look at the painting and you appreciate the artist by looking at the painting. Well, when you go out in the world, you appreciate God by looking at what he created. And I am quite certain that in that lightning flash, Brother Lawrence realized God and never forgot that his whole life. So it's very beautiful. So what I would like to say is that, and then I want to read you something else. I'm going to read you two things. Now I want to read you something from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And I hope I can read it because I don't have a lot of light here. I know what I'll do. I'll use my Kindle Paperwhite. This is really nice. I have The Practice of the Presence of God on here, and I also have The Imitation of Christ. But I happen to have a book right here. So I'll read in this book. I want to read something to you from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And it's called, this chapter is called, Of Avoiding Superfluity in Words. Avoiding too much talking, too much conversation, too many words. It says, flee the tumult of the world as much as you can, for the talk of worldly affairs is a great hindrance, although it is done with the sincere intention. For we are quickly defiled and enthralled with vanity. Oftentimes I could wish that I had held my peace when I have spoken, and that I had not been in the company of men. Why do we so willingly speak and talk with one another when we seldom return to silence before we have hurt our conscience? This is very, very good advice. Let me see if I can put it in perspective for you. There's great vanity in words. When you're around people, don't you sometimes get tired? See, being around people can be invigorating, and it can be a good thing. But for the most part, it's not a good thing, because people are draining. See, the way you are now in your unwashed state, in your fallen state, in your unsaved state, in your worldly state, your concupiscence, but use whatever term you want, the way you are naturally. See, it's not wrong, you can't help it. It's the way you were born. But the way you are naturally, and then having been mistaught about reacting. You've been taught since you were little to react and get excited and become emotional and get excited and laugh and scream and yell at the football game, and you've been and scream at concerts and get all excited. That's what you've been taught. And get angry and so on. Well, when you do, you give up energy. See, just about everything you do, you give up energy. See, the thing on the outside that teases you, the thing on the outside that stimulates you, it serves as a temptation. See, now the person or the object or the ball game that you're watching or whatever it is, maybe probably doesn't even know that it's a temptation. But people just know that they can get to you, that when you react, you're more in their power, that you are more likely to spend money or do what they want or whatever. See, or they think they're doing you a favor by dramatizing things and getting you to react. Or they can't help themselves. You know, my mother used to rant and rave and scream. I realize now she couldn't help herself. That's what her mother had done to her. I found that out when I went with my mother to Switzerland when I was a 10-year-old boy. I was sitting in the living room drawing, and in the kitchen I heard muffled voices coming from the kitchen, yelling, screaming, and sobbing and crying. And it was my grandmother, the chief battle axe, okay? I thought my mother was bad. Whoa, grandmother, just yelling and screaming in the most vicious way, and my mother became like a little girl crying. See? So then I realized, okay, that's what's done to my mother, now she does it to me. She can't help herself. But nevertheless, I reacted to it. I became upset, I cried, and so on when I was a little boy. It's only natural. So that's what happens to a lot of us. So now you go out in the world and you give up and you give up energy. So now let's get to this topic that Thomas à Kempis was talking about. See, this is very subtle. Who tells you that you should avoid too much conversation? Everybody tells you should go out there and talk and be sociable and get involved and have feelings and be supportive, and that's all you hear. You'll hear a one-sided thing. I'm not saying, Brother Lawrence is not saying you should be a recluse or that you should not like people. But what he's saying is that when you go out in the world to do your work, see, or your activities, moderation in all things, said Aristotle, because just be aware that you will give up energy. Because these other things are a temptation, aren't they? So let's settle this once and for all. All these things that people say about this and about that and politics and about sports and who's going to win the championship and which player is injured and which is the cheapest item to get on the internet and what, all of these things that people talk about. Are they temptation? Well, are they a distraction? Do they distract you from important things? Well, they do, don't they? They distract you from being there for your partner and for your kids. They distract you from the spiritual life. They distract you from thoughtfully pondering the meaning of your existence. They distract you from a lot. And so when you're distracted, so that distraction is a temptation. It's tempting you to do something that I guess we could say is wrong. If you should be there for your family, but instead you're watching a ball game, or instead you're talking about a ball game, or the person you're talking about the ball game with is standing there with a cigarette or a marijuana, or he says something a little sleazy, or you know that he's cheating on his wife, or something like that, and there you are, see, talking about a ball game. Well, there's something wrong. See, it's something wrong with that. So you injure your brother. Thomas à Kempis said you injure your. He said, how many times have I wished I had remained silent and not gone out among men? He said, because how many times have I come back? He said, rarely does a person go out in the world and then come back without having injured his conscience or her conscience. So when you go out in the world, yes, you have to be polite and a bit sociable. How are you doing? And good to see you and stuff like that. And you have to communicate with people when you're doing business with them or you're going about your activities. But silly talk, especially about trivial things or things that are none of your business. See, that's another way of looking at it. A lot of the things that people talk about are none of their business. And they're talking about things that they don't really know. See, if you speak boldly about someone when you really don't know, well, then your words are vain. You're speaking without understanding. So I think I've made the point, but now I want to say something else. Words, see, we get caught up in words. The words themselves become a distraction. And we become upset by words and excited by words. I teach a class, and in that class, more than once, I've heard someone say that they became upset and distracted when they were listening to talk radio. They were in their car driving, they were listening to talk radio, and they got angry at what was being said. I've heard that more than once. They really and truly became angry at what was said. So you see they're reacting to words. But words are like a vehicle. It's like the arrow that it carries a message. Remember back in the old movies where like a Robin Hood movie or something, and he wanted to get a message to someone, and then he would tie a note onto the arrow. He would tie the note onto the arrow, and then he would shoot the arrow, and the arrow would go and twang into the wall or into the tree beside the person, and the person would pull the arrow out of the tree, and then he would read the note. So the arrow carried the message. Well, that's what words are. Meaningful conversation. See, meaningful words, spoken meaningfully, are to awaken the person to the truth, to reality, to understanding. That's their purpose. And then when the person understands, then the words have accomplished. Then the words can be set aside. See? But angry words, vain words, convey what? Something else, something unwholesome. See? Or trivial things don't convey any meaning at all. So a lot of people say, well, I don't like hypocrites. I guess nobody does. Nobody likes hypocrites. But if your words don't convey meaning and good meaning, see, if people get caught up with your words, instead of being awaken to meaning. And if you get caught up in other people's words, see, without being awoken to meaning, then that's not good. So language is a very powerful thing, and for the most part, it does a lot of damage because people react to the words, especially words spoken with a mean intent, or words that say that what they don't mean, or words that say the opposite of what the person really means, and so on. It gets very confusing. That's why you have to stand back. You always have to stand back from language. So you hear the words without getting lost in the words. You have to be able to stand back with everything. When you read a book, scan lightly. Look for gems. Look for morsels of something good. Okay? Instead of reading each word. When you hear somebody talk, listen lightly. Let it go in one ear and out the other. If there's something of value, then you'll note. Your awareness will note it. If there's nothing of value, then you don't remember it. See, if the television is on, well, it's probably not anything worth watching, but let's say there is something worth watching. Then watch lightly. Stand back so you're watching, but you're also aware of your surroundings. You're not in the television. See, watch it lightly. Look for meaning. See, very important. And so therefore, people, unless you're a seasoned meditator and you're on the path to salvation, chances are you're too emotional. You are. You're 99.9% of people are too emotional, reactive, get caught up in things. And so then, frankly, you're not mature enough there's a lot of things you're not mature enough for. Okay, and that includes music too. See, remember that music and small talk and things like that, for the most part, when everything else has been done, when you've done your work, when you've done what's needed around the home, when you've been there for your family, your partner, your kids, when you've attended to the important things in life, if there's any time left over, see, even that should be spent in something thoughtful and meaningful. But if you watch a ball game, or you go to a bar, or you listen to some foolish, silly sports talk, or some foolish panel show on television, or whatever it is, it's foolishness. And so it's a distraction. Okay? A distraction from what's really important. So, I hope you enjoyed the little reading from the little reading from The Practice of the Presence about Brother Lawrence. Okay? And also the reading about avoiding the soup. How did he say it? Too many words. And that was Thomas à Kempis from The Imitation of Christ.